Okay, you get 2 mini homilies today. I just want to touch briefly on our gospel. The gospel is oddly written, and it is hard to understand. Jesus is talking about a master inviting his slave to the table for dinner, and he finishes by saying that such folks should say to themselves, "We are unprofitable servants, for we have done what we are obliged to do." So yeah, this is one part of Scripture where most of us need some help in understanding this. Jesus is really just making the point that we shouldn't be begging for treats and rewards just for doing our jobs. And sure, "Hey, nice work yesterday" from your boss is always nice to hear. We all need a little bit of that. But Jesus was warning his listeners against getting puffed up for fairly basic expectations. It's like setting the table for dinner, not because it's an act of basic decency and obedience, but because your dad will give you 15 more minutes of screen time after the meal. Not quite the same thing. There's a fairly new phrase that we use today for this kind of behavior: virtue signaling. I'm not exactly sure how long that phrase has been floating around mainstream culture, but it is at least a semi-normal thing to say these days. Virtue signaling is very common among celebrities and politicians, corporations to a degree. And essentially, it's proclaiming that you're a good person because you do this thing you do, or of this thing you support. We support fair trade coffee. We care about the world. Do business with us. I care about stopping animal cruelty. I'm better than most people. Love me, love me. I only buy organic produce at the grocery store. Love me. Aren't those people insufferable? As a general rule, the more someone literally says they're a good person, the more unlikely it becomes. Actual good people who are trying to make the world a better place tend to have a spirit of humility. They don't brag about the good things they do, which is part of the reason other people enjoy their company. So like so many other things, virtue signaling was a gospel issue far, far sooner than it was a social media issue. It was just expressed with different language. So with that out of the way, I want to spend the rest of my time on a miscellaneous topic: tradition. We touched on this for remedial Catholicism last week, and it's worth sharing here. Tradition is a pretty Catholic word these days because Martin Luther had issues with tradition, and for that reason, most Protestants don't value tradition to the degree that we do, which is a shame because tradition is incredibly useful. Now, the literal meaning of tradition is that which is handed down. So in the context of Catholicism, tradition is one half of divine revelation, the other half being sacred scripture. So tradition teaches us that we should be devoted to the rosary. We should go to confession semi-regularly. Tradition teaches us that human dignity must always be defended no matter the person in question. That is the backbone of our pro-life arguments and our distaste for capital punishment and war. Those are things that require a little bit more than the literal words of the Bible. We need the wisdom of those who came before us, inspired by the Spirit of God. They handed on to us answers that they had to work out in their lifetimes. And when we're all dead and buried, our generation will have a couple of things to hand on to those coming after us. I'm talking about the things that our grandparents never dreamed of having to deal with. Tradition goes hand in hand with progress. Tradition is progress over time. And for that reason, I remain deeply skeptical of people who proclaim progress while tearing down as much history and tradition as possible. That kind of progress is dangerous at best. It is disastrous at worst. And it's not actually progress in the first place in that way. Now, these very same people accuse us of being too in love with tradition. They think that we value tradition at the expense of our reason. Hey, Dad, why do we do that? Because it's a tradition. But it's inefficient. Let's do it this way. It will work better. No, we honor the traditions of our ancestors. That's just silly. The truth is, tradition, capital T, can be expressed with the phrase sound tradition. Not all traditions are sound traditions. Not all traditions deserve to be honored for all time. Some traditions are outdated, and they deserve to come to an end to make room for a better way. Absolutely. It is right and just to evaluate traditions on their merits. It is correct to say that traditions are not good just because they're traditions. Young people who complain and object to silly past traditions have at least some reason and intelligence on their side. But here's the critical detail that I consider it my mission as a priest to help you understand. Catholic tradition, capital T, is the sum of our teachings, insights, expressions, and beliefs that have already stood the test of time. They have earned our collective respect as teachings that will perpetually offer wisdom and enlightenment to any who are willing to see them for what they are. These are things that will never be outdated because they are linked to our human nature and our basic spiritual needs. The rosary will always be a worthy set of prayers. To pray the rosary is to give a bouquet of flowers to Jesus or his mother. Confession will always be good for the soul. And priests should always be respected as church leaders, even though some are bad eggs, and all of us have our issues and failings. So I say again, tradition is progress over time. Progress does not happen instantly. No individual magically has all the things they need for what society, demands for our next step as a civilization. Actual progress depends upon people building on the wisdom, faith, hope, and love of those who came before. Progress is not the destruction of the past. The destruction of the past leads to the repetition of the past, and a never-ending cycle is the very opposite of progress. So let me end with a mental picture for you all to take home. Think of time as an unfinished road to eternity. Progress is placing one more brick down. Everybody gets a brick that they get to put down. If you ignore tradition, it's like putting that brick down randomly. That road will become a series of disjointed skipping stones that is dangerous at best and disastrous at worst. But building upon tradition is like putting your brick next to the last one where it fits as best as possible and offers the best continual path from start to finish. Tradition is progress over time. So may you all build well and wisely.